Welcome to a very special holiday edition of All Things Global, powered by Vistatec. I am your host, Dominika D'Agostino.
And I'm your host, Suzanne Frayne.
And All Things Global was created to inspire compelling conversations and fresh ideas for people who develop long-term global strategies. We are thrilled to have not only one, but four remarkable guests with us today, joining us for the conversation around adapting to the great pivot in localization. Our first guest is Pascale Tremblay. She needs no introduction. She was actually the one who came to us to organize this panel, feeling the need for the conversation about how the industry leaders in various areas can help shape the future of the industry. And Pascale is the industry luminary, a seasoned globalization leader who now advises and develops localization initiatives for growing companies. In her most recent role, she was the director of localization at Gap. Then we have Justin Thorne. Justin is also an industry veteran, moving through many different companies, including Nickelodeon and Disney, and currently serves as head of localization at Upwork. Our third guest is Joe Holtman. Joe is enterprise account executive at Phrase, so he's representing the tools and technology side of the business. And last but not least, we have our own Phil Ritchie, our Chief Technology Officer at Vistatec, who guides Vistatec's AI strategy and contributes to open source initiatives across the industry. So before we kick off the conversation, just one housekeeping item. We will make sure to leave some room for questions at the end of the conversation. Please make sure to submit them in the chat box. Maria Roa, who is our Rockstar event manager, will be fielding the questions at the end of the event. So with no further ado, let's kick it off and maybe let's gauge the temperature first. So ChatGPT turned recently 1 year old in November, and this new paradigm shift brought about by many developments with AI and large language models. It brought a lot of changes to our industry. So are you positive and optimistic about the future? And I will let Pascale maybe take the first one.
This is exciting to be here this morning. So thank you for hosting this very compelling topic. So yes, actually, I'm very optimistic about the future. From a personal perspective, it's exciting to see the new ChatGPTs, your own personal GPTs, the increase of productivity, brainstorming with AI when you have to write a report or you have to summarize ideas. So from that perspective, it's very exciting. When you think about the language industry at large, it's also very exciting. However, I think it is a great shift. And for us and for the work we do every day, it represents a huge amount of work. So while it's going to change and some roles and responsibilities might be eliminated, I think it's going to create a new type of roles and a new type of work that we do. So yes, I am super excited and I can't wait to see what it's going to look like within the next few years.
How about you, Justin?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think one of the things that we're going to see is because we have new technology, new methods for doing similar things to what we've done before, at the same time that certain repetitive tasks are going to go away, new, perhaps also repetitive tasks to a certain degree are going to replace them. So just more broadly across society, I have a college professor friend in Tokyo who has his students submitting papers that he has to grade all the time. And he had his first in the last couple of weeks, a student saying, according to ChatGPT, quote, and then followed that with information that who knows how it is. So he's already having to figure out ways to dissuade his students from relying upon ChatGPT to the extent that it is deemed the source of all truth. So kind of policing the technology is going to become just as important as using it. But the focus tends to be through press and through all the coverage is, oh, it's amazing, all these things that it does. It's like, yes, there are amazing things that it does for sure. However, there are guardrails and there's a need for the human in the loop today still, and that will probably remain the case. And I hope it remains the case going forward, because the garbage in, garbage out principle applies to a certain extent. And over time, you can end up with things that were approved without proper review that then become standard issue. And therefore, you have this dilution over time of quality. So those are the areas that I worry about, but it's also exciting to kind of have the chance to take a crack at it.
Yeah, exactly. Do you second that sentiment, Joe? Are you equally optimistic?
Yeah, I'm definitely optimistic about it. I think our industry is already tackling the AI conversation. It's crazy that it's only basically a year old, this chat GPT, but I think it's going to, like Pascale said, make us more efficient. We're going to be able to bring more value to our companies, especially on the buyer side. Get a bigger voice inside those companies, start to tie into more different divisions, and really bring additional ROI to the industry, help us translate more content. And the ultimate goal of localization is to knock down those language barriers. And with these efficiencies, with these bigger voices, it's going to allow us to achieve our goal.
How about you, Phil? Do we have a different opinion?
Yeah.
No, I'm definitely optimistic. I suppose my optimism is always tainted by the fact that my group has to pivot every time something like this happens. Our quarterly plan goes out the window, and we have to look at what other things we're going to squeeze in and what things maybe we should not pursue any longer. So yeah, it's exciting, but it brings its own challenges in terms of what do you focus on, and what are the things that you need to get done.
Are you able
Okay.
to discuss your top 2 priorities, Phil? Or is that part of the great secret?
Well, they're all under the banner of AI these days, but it's it's a challenge. Barely finish working on one thing and the next thing is already there. So it's but it's good. It's good.
Very good. Thank you so much. So my question is for Pascale, and that's just kind of for the overall wider audience. What kind of advice do you have for business leaders as far as integrating new language and AI strategies into their business model or their organization?
Yeah, well, it's going to be challenging, and I think one of the main reason is, in the past, as an industry, we've undergone several digital transformation, technological transformation. So this one goes beyond just a technical or technological transformation. It's also cultural. It's going to change the way we work together. It's going to change the way we communicate together. And it's really challenging, not only the language industry, but it's a massive transformation across everything we do. And to a certain extent, also redefine what human value is within a workforce environment. So when we think in terms of that global mindset of this impact, I believe that first and foremost, now that ChatGPT is 1 year and companies that had time to play around, explore what AI is or generative AI. I mean, for us, we've had AI in the back end in our solutions for several years already, but now it's out in the public. So now for 1 year, they've had time to wrap their head around it and So I think what we'll see from a buyer perspective next year, and we've already started, is corporate strategy incorporating AI in everything. And what does that mean? And so in terms of language, it's very important to, I believe, to go back to the basic. And as a localization leader, globalization leader, what is language? I know it sounds really basic, right? But what's language? What is the purpose of language within my business? And because what we've seen over the last few years is that language was going beyond just the traditional linear translation process. We, in mature organization, language needed to be embedded in everything. So the challenge for localization leader was to connect language through technology, through automation. And to echo Phil's word, it was feasible because the speed at which technology was evolving was somewhat slow compared to what's happened in the last 12 months. So speed and really thinking through what we need to do is going to be critical. So in the past, it was more of a top-down look and view at the problem. Okay, the business has this strategy to go into 30 countries. So this is what how I'm gonna apply the language strategy, and we're gonna apply it to the ecosystem. But now we have to turn it upside down and really look at language. And okay, so what is language? What does language mean, for example, for the retail industry? What does it mean for the medical industry? And build the blueprint of language capability. So we have to shift our thinking in terms of, okay, how do we set our company for success? Because when we looked at the tools, the platforms, the new software available to companies, they are all adding some sort of generative AI or AI technology that will have a language AI component or visual AI component within that. So how in the back end as a language technologist or localization technologist do you weave that thread of language and help your company really distribute its DNA, its terminology, its context across the whole ecosystem? So I think there's a lot to consider in terms of how to look at language and your strategy, but it's really it's going to be to really go back to the basic, because I think my last point here was we had a bit of a generic approach to localization in the past, and we've scaled it, and we were able to bring it across different industries. Well, now when we think in terms of content, the purpose of language for retail is different than for the medical industry. So how do we enable those language capabilities and curate a content orchestration specific to those industry? Because the level of validation, LQA, and all that will be extremely different, and a different approach will be needed there.
Absolutely. Totally agree with that. Joe, you have a question.
Yeah, I think to build on top of that, on like advice for the business leaders and how to leverage it, is just one, really lean into it. Start to invest resources into studying how your specific use cases, and kind of building off of what Pascale said there, is there's going to be different use cases for the fashion industry or other industries, and understanding how you can bring that to your company, and really figure out what part of AI you're going to leverage. Because I think a lot of the times we get stuck and we're talking at way too broad of a idea of AI, but let's jump into each other's use cases and use consultants, bring in partners, or even if it's someone internally. Is my use case around user generated content, and I need to leverage AI to improve the source quality that's going into an MT engine to get better quality? Or is my use case for AI to understand what kind of content needs to go to human linguists, and what kind of content can go straight to publication, where I'm really leveraging UI is with MT and quality evaluation after the output. So I think really diving into those use cases, figuring out how you can leverage it, and instead of talking at it more as a broader idea of AI. And then once you bring that value, you start again bringing that value to your organization. Your voice becomes stronger, and we really become a better industry, and our industry grows, and we take a bigger share of the voice in our company.
Absolutely. Now, Joe, to bring this back to your point as well, there's a lot of people that are listening to this that might either have had more weighty localization leaders that are no longer there. Maybe they're just getting started. They're not very mature. So one thing that you indicated is bring in your consultants such as Pascale to help you pivot, hence the name of our show today, to understand where do we begin, because we hear that a lot on the vendor side is we're a little unclear where to begin. So I think you made a really good point there.
Yeah, and I think that's something I heard over and over at Loc World too this year, is the conversation a lot was about AI, but then someone comes to you and they're like, okay, how do I start? And
Where
it's
do I
like,
start?
well, let's figure out what your goals are, what your business requirements are, and your use cases are, and then we can start to implement solutions. And that solution very well may be AI, leveraging AI.
Absolutely.
And I think I'd like to add one more thing here is, you know, when we set up and we create these new use cases, I think for the language industry, but also for all industries, it's the precedents, right? How to build from precedents, because we need to train those models, and people with familiarity with use cases, whether it's in the language industry or other industry, are going to be critical in building the proper models or the proper workflows because of the experience that they've gained over several decades sometimes.
Absolutely.
And I know, Phil, that, you know, here at Vistatec, we have several use cases that we already kind of put into place, both for internal tools and also, you know, initiatives that serve directly our customers. But I'm curious, Justin, if at Upwork, and I see that you have your hand up as well, if at Upwork you see also some of this implemented already.
Yeah. Sorry, I was going to mention one thing really quickly, was that there's a couple of things that you have to bear in mind if you're starting in localization for the first time. A lot of companies are probably starting for the first time. It's much harder to build those learning models off of 0 words. So a lot of times you're going to need to sort of go the more traditional route before you can change and shift gears and go into the learning model. So it depends on where you are, how mature your current TM is, whether you can immediately jump into it, or whether you have to do a lot of the preparatory work, which I think Pascale was touching on. So I'm sorry, could you please give me the question again?
Oh, I was just curious whether at Upwork you also implemented already, you know, or you are seeing any use cases that could be implemented with AI.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, the areas where I think we can probably benefit the most are in taking similar copy to similar copy, but having to make a few tweaks to make it more SEO relevant, particularly if you're translating between the same languages that are iterations of the same, so inflections of Spanish, inflections of French, inflections of English, and so on. For those, running them through AI is potentially going to be more rapid, because it's quicker for AI to come up with a alternate wording for something without totally breaking the paragraph. Not always, but you have a chance of getting kind of a version that you can go, I can sign off on that. That's okay. Let's run with that. And so some of that kind of work can be very labor intensive if you do it kind of the manual, traditional way. And that means historically that you've been able to release less content that's doing that job that you're trying to have it do. Whereas if you're able to involve the AI, it can rapidly push you through some of these things that are otherwise very beleaguering, time spending work. So in terms of getting higher similar quality, higher volume, it can be extremely helpful. And for the purposes of doing well in search engine traffic and search engine optimization, is that you can come up with wording that is different enough that you're not going to be accused by Google of being a clone of the previous site that you based your work on. So I think there's definitely some value there. That's one area where I'm kind of doing some testing right now, but there's plenty of other areas too where you can do similar things. And interface text as well, very generic sort of UI UX text that almost never changes. That's another great area where you can just have it feed in the stuff, because the chances of it being wrong is so low that you're better off just saying, go for it. I trust you to do this. But you have to be careful, because of course, the smaller the word count is for any of those things, the further afield it can screw things up royally. So you still have to have the human in the loop to be sure that it hasn't done something completely crazy. And I've seen some AI solutions done where the wrong word is used for home, for the home page, and so it uses the word for a literal home as opposed for the home page, where in some languages those are actually distinct terms. So those kinds of things still will always occur.
Yeah. So in the spirit of concern that we had asked earlier, we have a question from, I hope I'm not saying this incorrectly, Frank Abate. And feel free to jump in if you want to answer. Where do you all see LSPs when AI becomes the norm for localizing content? Are they going to be relevant when a customer can leverage AI MT on their own to translate product documentation and marketing content? What are your thoughts around that?
I don't think so at all. I think their roles may change. I think they can be experts on how to leverage this, how to advise on workflows. I think there still we'll need many linguists in this, focusing on quality, training engines and stuff like that. I think they still have a really big part, in their role may change a little bit, but just being experts on how to take advantage of different technology as well. There's still a huge need for services. I think that's a big thing that maybe we don't touch on as enough is our roles are definitely going to change, but we're still all going to have really big roles in this pivot. So yeah.
So Joe, what would you advise an LSP to be investing in from a talent perspective around AI and what's to come? Because I think I think they scratch their heads and they don't quite know where to invest, or where to automate at times, but just overall where to invest as far as talent goes.
Yeah, maybe Pascale can help on this as well, but I think solution architects are still so very powerful in helping you build the program that's custom to you. The solution architects are also very knowledgeable, usually on their own technology or third-party technology. And so just helping listen to the customer and help them take advantage of the technology. So I just always thought the solution architect role is maybe the most important role in our industry already. So they're just going to become even bigger, and you can really differentiate yourself as you continue to learn and figure out how to take advantage of this for your customers.
Makes total sense. So I guess, Joe, that leads me to the $1 million question that many people on the call are curious about. Do you think the TMS at some point will be obsolete in the coming years based on what you're seeing?
I guess it's kind of your definition of the TMS is how I look at it. The TMS in technology is in localization is going to have to evolve, just like our roles are going to have to evolve. So if you have the definition of just a spreadsheet and managing workflows with leveraging translation memory and then sending it to a linguist, maybe it's becoming a little bit more obsolete, but I think it's really about these technologies evolving. Even when I'm talking to clients, I don't always like to just use TMS. I think of it more as a localization suite. So maybe we need some new branding for translation management system, because I think it's more of a globalization system. We're still going to need something that manages those assets to make sure that you specific to your company, still something that needs to manage workflows. It's going to have to change where you can bring LLMs into that workflow. content can go easily in and out. You're still going to need a place for linguists to work in. So I think technology will continue to evolve. I honestly think whatever name you want to put on it, we're going to become an even more powerful tool as we can bring in content creation into our technologies and just really help to get time to market faster. So kind of repeating myself, but yeah, it's the TMS is evolving, and that's the big thing. There's still going to be a big point for localization technology to add a ton of value. And I think it's actually adding more value as we really figure out how to leverage AI.
Right. So it's really a semantics thing. It may not be called a TMS, but there maybe needs to be an update on what we call it as moving forward down the road. So good point, Joe. Pascale, you've had your hand up, and then Justin.
Yeah, I wanted to circle back a little bit regarding LSPs and their services. I think the need for different services and new partnership will definitely be there, and it's going to become greater and greater. The content aspect of what companies are being subjected to is hyper fragmented now, and it will continue to get exponentially fragmented. And so the type of partnership with LSPs will change, because you will, we did have small projects in the past with very little context, and maybe it's for a website, maybe it's for HR, it depends. But if the trends would just continue to grow exponentially there, and that's going to be a challenge. How do you properly orchestrate that? But because everything's going to be part of a platform, whether it's HR, whether it's IT, and you have to orchestrate all that. So that aspect will just continue to exponentially grow. So a new partnership will be necessitated between the two. And so, and also for the LSPs, how do you service this type of content? And I see a need for greater expertise, for example, in HR, if you're doing HR content, or in, retail or whatnot, because we will have to work with generative AI, and there's going to be a huge push for multilingual content creation with generative AI. And because when you translate from a source, it's not always the most appropriate way to do translation, because the source is very vague and there's just too many idiomatic expression. So sometimes I can see for sure that it's going to go into multilingual content creation. So how do you adapt your resources to help validate that content, because you can't just publish it? So that aspect will need to be considered. And in terms of TMS, I love to hear, yes, it's going to change. It's probably not, who knows what it's going to be named in the future, but as we continue to grow, I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens there, because in some cases we might need a TMS, in some cases we might not, because it's going to be that push and pull between content creation versus actual translation. And for some content type, I see there might not need it. There might no longer need to be a need for translation. It's going to be straight creation. However, in other aspect, translation is going to be there. And that brings us back to my first point. We have to go back to the root of the purpose of our usage of language within our industry. What do we use it for? And what is our strategy based on that? And so if we can remove all the noise around it, and we build from the core of what the industry is, it's going to really help create that vision and that roadmap. I mean, there's so many changes. Of course, there's going to be mistakes, or not mistakes, but there's going to be a lot of fine tuning to go along the way. But I think at the core, it's very important to define what are you using language? Because in the medical industry, for sure, you're going to need translation or exact replication. But retail, it's all about transcreation right now. So how do you get to that step?
So it's a combination thereof, but both very important as far as Joe and his industry start looking at things and how to label them and where, you know, what's the priority. So very interesting.
Absolutely, yeah.
Justin, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I tend to agree that I think there's going to be a need, most likely, there's going to be a need to shift at least some aspects of how a TMS works to focus less upon string matching, like this string equals this string equals that string, which is already not true today. It will become more true as we go down the road and are able to do sort of smart AI-based creative tasks and that sort of thing. But it doesn't mean that we're not going to be storing any data. It just means the type of data being stored changes. So turns of phrase, ways of saying things, certain approaches, style guide omissions and insertions, things along those lines where you're managing the language policy at a different level than you are currently, which is maintaining a TM and hoping that it's all accurate, will change. So the need to sort of think about language holistically will increase, which is great. And of course, that means that companies will want to hire people who are doing localization for whom it's not a hobby, but actually their life's work, and find those types of people who really get it and really want to dig into the details so that they're not accidentally misrepresenting their brand in the language that's not as commonly used around the office. The other thing, just another plug for localization professionals, since it's mostly what I know, is that I often find that the localization or the globalization teams in companies are the ones who, not all companies, but a lot of companies are the ones who have their assets most organized because they have no choice. If their assets are not organized, they can't do their work at all. So TMSs may become heavier engaged in the content localization side and not necessarily the hosting side, but in the management side, meaning you have almost a asset management platform built into your TMS, and that's where you're focusing a lot of your attention on. It's like, here's the video that's going out next week, and here it is in the 12 languages we're doing. Here's this other thing that we're going to release on social media, and here it is in the 12 languages we're releasing. And so you're actually kind of operating in a more of an asset management platform kind of mode of thinking, and you're making sure that all your assets are done. And how you get there is some aspect of the old school TMS versus whatever we evolve to going down the road, bearing in mind that the standard TMS will still be needed for things like Pascale pointed out, legal documents, medical documents, where flourishy language is completely not what you need. You need to literally say exactly the same thing that's being looked over by legal people. But historically, legal people have been very reticent about having localization departments do any work for them because they're worried about getting in trouble in those foreign markets. So they'll still need to be, but of course, legal offices are also starting to employ AI to create content. So it's a very interesting time. Where does that content get created? Does it get created on the legal side, or does it come back to the localization side and get done there? I think the answer will be both, because it'll really depend on how much comfort level legal teams have in companies to do that. So it's going to be complicated because obviously the use cases are not uniform. So I think there's going to be a bit of all those things.
I also see a legal feast in the beginning when things don't necessarily go correctly. So very interesting point. I know we have a question that I'll let Domi ask from the audience, but I just wanted to get one last thing from Phil. Phil, any thoughts about what you're hearing around these topics from a LSP head of technology side?
Yeah, I mean, the TMSs are not going to go away because they're the choreograph engines that make the processes happen. They're critical to particularly large projects or continuous localization. The TMS is what does all of that arrangement of process and make sure that things happen. So that their emphasis in certain areas might go away, but I think they're the core backbone of many companies. In terms of the LSPs, I think the LSPs and certainly the supply chains of the LSPs is where a lot of the expertise that AI needs currently resides for language. So whether those experts are providing the linguistic knowledge for the AI, or they're validating it, or they're looking at strengthening domain knowledge for the AIs. You know, that's where that expertise currently lives. So you know, we certainly haven't seen any negative impact. You know, if anything, our linguistic experts are more in demand. So
what area of expertise? I'm sorry, because I know Pascale has her hand up and Domi has a question from the audience, but just real quickly, Phil, what expertise, and Joe had indicated solutions architects. So from the LSP side, what expertise do you suggest that LSPs invest in the most, to say the top 2 or 3?
Well, certainly language. Yeah, my team has grown, so technical expertise would be the top 2 for sure.
Okay, thank you. Pascale?
I think it's to get back to, I had my hands up when Justin was talking. So to get back to that topic, I think it's going to be interesting to see where content is headed, because it's about how will content be structured within an organization. And I think the business is still wrapping their head around how to manage content. Some companies, some big companies do have a clear path about content, but for the most part, content is still generated in a very traditional way. So unless they do work and think through content and language in the same sphere, it's still gonna create some friction points around the product cycle.
Totally agree
Yeah,
with
I
that.
think I can see it from both sides. On one hand, what Justin suggested, that it could be like a big repository, right, of content that we just pick different things from. On the other hand, there is also the issue of legality of it, and corporations also trying to kind of keep their power as far as we know what's in the source, and the same has to be in the target, right? Versus giving more flexibility to local markets. So there's always a consideration that is important for a TMS. But just before we go to Justin, just a question comment from our friend Kirill. When do you think will we go to the concept of source prompt as opposed to source content? And Justin, do you have any thoughts on this one?
Yeah. I think it's too early to do that at the moment, and it's going to depend a lot upon the specific the sort of content needs and strategy of the industry that you're in, and the kind of content that you manage. So it's going to vary a lot. But at the moment, we're still in the here's the source, let's get the translation. So you usually create the source in one language, and kind of to Pascale's point, we might start creating the source in every language. That's definitely a possibility. My worry there is if you have a marketing team that's like, we don't really need localization. We can just create 15 articles for 15 languages, and this will be great. And ChatGPT told me everything about this is perfect, so I'm just going to roll these out. And you start having a very a degraded experience or a degraded output, because you have every team in the company generating their own stuff in multiple languages. That's a definite risk, and it's also a definite use case for maintaining TMS structures so that you actually have a single source of truth. We've probably all experienced this in our careers, where a number of teams, we just went ahead and localized these things for you, Justin. You should be thanking us. And it's like, no, why did you do that? Please never do that again. I appreciate the sentiment, but yeah, but let's not do that again, please. And so this kind of decentralization can also be a part of this, that if the TMS goes away, we lose, or if we open up the tool set to anybody in the company who wants to use it, that you do run some pretty high risks of losing the consistency and the quality and the sort of brand IP sort of associated things that you want to do. So I think the maturity of your organization will dictate the answer to the question to a certain extent, and also the particular content offering that you have to make. In some cases, totally, you can probably transition to that much quicker, but it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all scenario, and it's probably in general still a bit early.
Absolutely, and it's yeah. Go ahead, Pascale.
Yeah, I'd like to add something. I'm fully aligned with Justin here, and I think I'd like to add the end here is about also a mindset shift about content in languages. And in some organization, there's already a push to find how to create multilingual content, but but teams have to work upstream in terms of the mindset about content. And in previous roles, and what I'm seeing also with other buyers trends is that English needs to be treated as one other language as well. So because they're being pushed to use generative AI in their content creation. So once there is a shift in the mindset and English is yet another language in your toolbox to communicate with your customers, then this will change the mindset about content creation and created content from prompt. But I don't think it's going to be a direct prompt. It's going to need to still have a creative brief, and you're going to need to implement filters for different countries. So working upstream in creating that generative content, it's going to take a lot of efforts, because the mindset to go from that traditional linear cycle to a multilingual content approach, which is coming because there's many people working on that. It's just a matter of time to put all the pieces together, and also to change that culture, because it's a different way to look at it. So lots of challenges, but definitely I'm sure we're going to see the first use cases applied within the next 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, and I see that Joe also wants to add something to that.
Yeah, I think building off of something Justin said too, where right now it is kind of scary if someone tries to tackle localization that's not an expert. But I think that's something how localization leaders of their company can really take advantage of, is bringing localization to everyone, where it's almost working in the background, but still be able to have that quality and have those assets behind it that are supporting it, so that they can leverage it, but you can still feel confident that you're getting good quality out, and that those terms and stuff are still being collected. We're still getting that centralization, but they're able to have localization at their fingertips. So I think that's another thing that these business leaders can focus on, is how do I bring localization to the rest of the industry, and or my company, and I'm just kind of in the background making sure it all works very well and seamlessly.
A very good
Yeah,
point.
I agree. I think that
Yeah.
very good point, because it brings us right to the question, exactly what can localization leaders do to be in the forefront of these ideas, and maybe to a bigger question in general, since what Pascale mentioned before. I know that a lot of people like to compare the Gen AI revolution to what happened with MT back in the day. But I think that, to Pascale's point, it does affect practically every single industry versus, the MT revolution back in the day. And so how can our industry lead the conversation in this AI age? And yeah, what is the role of the localization leaders here? And I will let Justin take a stab at this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of goes back to the point that I was making a minute ago, which is that the localization ops team, or whatever they turn out to be called in a particular organization, need to be the SMEs for this aspect of things. They can't be just a service, but they have to be, partners that are able to establish the guardrails, the benchmarks, the ways of doing things, so that you have a higher likelihood of success. And as we know, everything's evolving constantly, even over the past 15 years with machine translation being kind of ahead of the curve and AI driven language work, is that we've had a little more time to get used to it, and we're not even used to it yet. And so if you can imagine the rest of the marketplaces just being introduced to this for the very first time, there's going to be all kinds of crazy that's going to happen, and that's just guaranteed. That's part of the learning curve, and that's actually okay, as long as you don't do anything that's super damaging to your brand or to your business in the meantime. Then you're fine. You'll learn from the mistakes, and you'll find new things that you didn't even realize that you could do, which is also exciting. One of the things about, like, even in the prompts you're talking about a moment ago, is that it's great that prompts are understood in 100+ languages according to all of the tools that you use these days, but how they interpret all those languages can vary widely. And because a lot of this work was done in US English speaking laboratories, there's still a massive bias towards things being sourced in English, and even the way that you discuss things that you're asking the tools to do being English centric to a large extent. So you have a couple of problems. Compound problem of, one, English is probably one of your better languages to be originating in, not the only one, but one of the better ones to originate in to get the outputs that you're looking for as a US English speaker. But what you get back from those things that you're prompting for may not be exactly the thing that resonates in the market that you're targeting, because you're taking I want you to create a document that has 3 points, and it starts out with a declaration of its intent, and then at the end it sums up by saying, because of those 3 things that I said, this is true. That's a document structure based upon how language is taught in the US, not anywhere else. So persuasive discussions, marketing copy, things that you would say, the use of exclamation marks, we love them in the US. We use them way too often. Nobody else does. We love all caps, all these things that if you just take them and you put them through an engine, they will be retained. And even if you style guide your way into having less of those things make their way in, there's still going to be a lot of techniques that you have to make sure are incorporated into the models that you choose to use. And those are things that the localization team knows well from having gone through the pain of things being done sort of not quite as well as they could be, even with human, editors throughout start to finish. People pushing things through quickly and not reviewing them as well as they should can lead to similar issues. Now we're going to be doing that same thing, but much quicker. Therefore, your ability to sort of retain that or kind of keep it from getting too zany becomes more important. So you have to be almost hyper focused as a localization org.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, and particularly from the industry that Pascale has come from. I don't think there's a lot of margin or room for error. I think that your brand can be impacted much easier in maybe that e-commerce retail environment than perhaps other environments. So, but a really good point there. I think we also had, did you want to go through Krill's comments, Domi?
Sure, yes. Let me do that. I think that Kirill, and Kirill is an interesting example because he's from Estonia, right? And it's also about the languages that are more powerful in this new, generative AI world versus the ones who maybe are not. Exactly. And I know that I think it also is a passion of Justin, actually. So basically the long tail languages, right? And how are they not, like, how to avoid them being left out of this AI push in localization.
Yeah, definitely so. It's one of the things that I always worry about just in general, and this has kind of accelerated it, that, just the nature of the internet, there being sort of a dominant set of 19, 20 languages that kind of take up most of the oxygen across the internet, means by definition that some languages fall by the wayside. And this will, again, accelerate it because of the volumes that we can now be pushing things through at. And the other thing, of course, is that there's uneven implementation even amongst more of the more common languages of the internet. So, for example, a survey that came out this year showed that in the US, 51% of American enterprises are already actively using AI in their business, 51%. So that's over half. And the same survey was a survey between the US and Japan. And in Japan, the number was 7%. So, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Japan doesn't move quite as quickly as US does. US likes to turn on a dime usually on a lot of things, but also because the technology is originated in the US, that has an advantage as well to have implementation happen in the same time zone and with people that you can confer with. But it points to the fact that different cultures will have different approaches to this, different business models in different cultures will have different approaches to this. And the key problem was in the past, to even handle long tail languages, if you were an enterprise based outside of one of those markets that wanted to make sure you targeted a market with a long tail language, it was usually cost and availability that was the problem, right? Like it would be really expensive to do Haitian Creole, or it would be really slow to get it done, or you have an unreliable availability, those kinds of things. So market demand was always outpaced. But now I think the problem will be quality over anything else, because the language models will have much less information to resort to in order to build up a properly vetted, properly set up market for doing AI-based translations. And if those are the only languages that don't have an AI availability or have such low quality that people don't want to use them, then those languages get dropped. So what is probably needed is individualized programs, and Japan's doing this as well. The standard models that come in from ChatGPT are okay in Japanese, but they do some things really badly. And so the Japanese government is pouring money into big industry in Japan to fill in the gaps. NEC and other big companies and Toshiba and other companies are all doing their research to come up with a better set of engines that work better for doing things in Japanese. So that'll be a big part of it. And it's on the news every day in Japan. So they're definitely thinking about it. But they're not as quick to get to it because they need to do some of the work that's already been done in the US before they can come out with it. So there's going to be a delay even for primary languages. But it's great if you have a government that has a lot of money to be able to do these things for you, or to donate money to research. But if those don't exist, then it will probably fall on NGOs, institutes of education, research, sort of philanthropic research organizations to say, we want to save this language from becoming made more irrelevant, and we'll pay the extra that it takes to do these learning models. The good news is the learning models are going to get cheaper and cheaper to do over time. So perhaps it'll be a lull of, oh, this is going to be bad. Oh, it's come back now because it's gotten so cheap to do that not doing it is silly. So that's my hope, but I don't know where it's actually going to turn out.
Yeah,
Good
that's
point.
very
Very
interesting.
good point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pascale,
And
you had a
Pascale?
question. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to address Carol's comment on language quality and output quality. So I think as to echo Joe, Phil, and Justin's comment and what I was saying earlier, it's going to be about setting up the blueprint and the language capabilities, and as that's going to be our responsibility as localization leaders. And the crux of the problem will be in the strategic orchestration of content, and how do you orchestrate so that you in some cases you have to implement language quality. In some it's okay, it's going to be, you're going to have to put that lever where it's not going to be a linear type of workflow where language quality is evaluated, but we do have now a lot more automation to help predict the quality that MT Gen AI create the output, and also help indicate where a human is needed to validate the output of the machine or the translation even itself. So I think it's going to be in the orchestration, in the priorities, but I don't think if you can have, as a localization leader within your industry, if you can have a seat at the table and discuss that language ecosystem or that language layer in your tech stack, then you can really implement a good quality program. If not, that's going to be definitely challenging. But I think it doesn't mean that we remove quality. It just means quality is managed in a more granular way, and it has to be more intentional.
Thank you, Pascale. I'm mindful of the time. I just wanted to let everybody know in the audience, if you have questions, please type them in the chat box. Justin, I want to get to you as well and your question. But before I do, really quickly, Joe, Phrase has a custom AI tool. Can you just kind of give us at a high level how you guys are dealing with quality in that regard?
Yeah, in a few different ways. We definitely have our own MTQE quality evaluation that we actually just launched this month. And that's again to help understand the output. We're working on evaluating source so that you're putting better content into the MT engines. And will improve the quality as well. Just based on if I were to write a sentence, it would have multiple grammar errors. So fixing that with AI will help with that translation. Also, then leveraging AI, as Pascale said, with dynamic workflows, understanding what needs to go to what needs to go to human uplift, what can go straight to publication. So there's a lot of different ways that we're focusing on it beyond just leveraging machine translation and stuff like that. So I think that's kind of where too I say I have trouble when I go to someone and just talk about a TMS. It's more about a localization suite and a full solution for your localization teams is where TMSs are pivoting towards, and making sure that we can bring all those tools to you and help with all those different kind of things.
Good point, and definitely a point to words matter. So
Yeah,
make a
definitely.
good point there. Justin.
Oh, just following up on what Pascale mentioned earlier, before Joe had his bit there, was that the anecdotally, I've been seeing on LinkedIn as I'm scanning through job listings in localization, a lot more interest in what you would call long tail, or at least sort of medium to long tail languages, roles that are very specific to those languages, where in the past I wouldn't have seen, at least anecdotally, as nearly as many of those. So I think there's already maybe a bit of a pivot happening in some organizations where they realize, oh, the engine we have does not do Slovak very well. We should probably get an expert in there and kind of help us out with this. And so I think we're already starting to see that shift happening due to demand ahead of altruism or any other good sort of reason to do that. So it's interesting. I think it's already kind of naturally we are finding that there are shortcomings in the engines that we have right now in handling these markets that are important to us. So as long as a lot of those markets remain important to enough organizations, it will probably grow to a certain extent on its own, not at the same pace that English and Japanese and French and German grow, but there still is, if there's a demand, that demand will be filled. The vacuum won't last very long.
Totally agree with that.
Very interesting. Okay, being mindful of the time, maybe one final question, and let's make it like a lightning round, maybe. So what are the things that excite you the most about this AI revolution? And it can kind of serve as a wrap up and maybe a summary of what we discussed today. Phil, do you want to give it a go?
Sure. I suppose on a personal level, the thing that excites me the most at the moment is, you know, I'm a learning addict. I'm a Coursera addict, and the thing with teaching yourself stuff or using asynchronous methods is, you know, if you don't quite grasp a concept, it's difficult to fill that in. And AI has been brilliant. You know, I'm sitting here at 1:30 a.m. asking AI to explain certain bits of the course that I'm doing. So that's very cool. At a professional level, it's, you know, my job by its nature is kind of trying to bring a bit of disruption to things, or at least to keep reevaluating aspects of the job. And you know, AI is just giving us another opportunity to do that. And one of the interesting things that we did in the company was very early on to give everybody in the company access to ChatGPT in a kind of secure and private environment. And the way or the feedback from people within the company, you know, whether they're in project management or QA or engineering, has been very interesting. So that's quite cool too.
Thank you, Phil. We appreciate that. We are at the top of the hour. And a special thank you to Pascale, Phil, Justin, and Joe for their subject matter expertise. I thank everybody for joining the holiday edition of All Things Global, powered by Vistatec. We wish everybody a very, very happy holiday season. And sounds like we might have a version 2, as this topic seems to be able to be something that we could go on for quite some time. So again, thank you for joining. If you need anything in regards to globalizing your content, please reach out to Domi or myself or your sales rep at Vistatec. And thank you and happy holidays.